So you've been earning lots of Avios points and you want to make sure that you're getting the best value for those points. In this video I'm going to share with you 5 of the best ways to spend your Avios, and also going to be covering 3 of the worst ones that you should avoid. The first best way to spend your Avios is honestly on anything that you can actually use them for. I'm going to talk a lot in this video about ways to make the most of the points and really maximise the value you get from them. But in truth, some of the best value ways to use it can be a bit difficult to obtain sometimes. They might need quite a lot of points and you may be in a position where you can't actually be earning that many. If that is the case, I've got a great video available for you to watch after this one. Or the circumstances of where you live, or limitations on when you can go away could really limit what you can do with your points. In any of those circumstances, just going for a redemption that you can actually obtain is probably the way forward. When I first started earning Avios points about 10 years ago, I was on a really low income at the time, so my actual potential to earn Avios was pretty low. And whenever I travelled, I was always going for the lowest possible ticket, always flying economy, whether short haul or long haul. So at that time, I did use my points quite a bit on either premium economy or even economy trips. Whilst I knew I wasn't going to be getting the best possible value for those points by doing this, it did ultimately mean that I was able to travel a lot more than I would have done otherwise, or was able to travel in a lot more comfort than I could afford. For example, some of my earliest Avios redemptions were flying premium economy to Asia, and there's no way I could have afforded to do that with cash, so using my points to do that was a great way to do it. On a similar note, last year I had a couple of companion vouchers from my Amex card that were due to expire. Rather than having a set destination in mind and trying my best to find the available dates for that, I instead just looked at when was I able to go away, and then I looked to see where would actually be available to go with points at that time. Because of that strategy, I ended up booking flights to both Kenya and India, and although there were places that I wanted to go at some point in time, they weren't necessarily on my radar to travel to anytime soon, but as soon as I saw that I could fly there in business class using my points, I thought this was a great reason to go. A lot of people would advise against using your points on a trip to somewhere like India because often the business class fare isn't that expensive, and so you're not getting as great value for your points than if you were flying to somewhere where the cash cost of business class was a lot higher. But that cash cost was still a lot more than I'd be willing to pay in cash for the tickets, so being able to go there with points and have a relatively low cost due to only paying, I think it was $450 return in taxes and charges, like that to me was brilliant value, even if I could have potentially maximised those points values slightly better. Now I've talked a bit there about getting maximum value for your points, and I think before I go on it's worth explaining exactly what I mean by that. The best way to calculate what kind of value you're getting for your points is to look at what the cash fare is and just figure out how many points you're trading to substitute that cash amount. Now this can be a useful thing to do to just figure out, is it worth making this redemption? It's also something that, me being a bit geeky, I quite like looking at that to see what value I'm getting from my points. But I think generally speaking, if you're new to this, if you're new to using points and you just want to make sure you're not getting ripped off, I think just following the general rules I go through next is probably a better way of doing it than always calculating to maximise that value. So what other kind of trips do we get good value for our points? The next point I wanted to talk about was doing long-haul business class. Generally speaking, if you're flying in long-haul business class and using points, you're probably going to be getting good value for those points, as the cash fares are very high, so you're actually deducting quite a lot for the points that you're using. And this is especially the case if you have either a companion voucher or an upgrade voucher. To give an example of just how important these companion vouchers can be, on some of the long-haul trips I did last year that I talked about earlier, so Kenya and India, you're looking at 180,000 points return, and that's for one person. However, if you have a companion voucher, it's actually just the same 180,000 points for 2 people. So that voucher can save you 180,000 points, and if you're going further afield, if you go to Australia, something like that, you could be saving even more points. And because BA do charge quite a lot of points for their long-haul business class, it really, to me, only feels worthwhile doing if you do have that companion voucher. If there's 2 of you going, you'll get it for 2 for 1. And if you're travelling solo, you can do the same trip for half the number of points. We're quite fortunate in our household, both of us have got the BA Premium Plus Amex, which means that every year we're going to get 2 of those vouchers to be able to use. So if we're ever flying BA long haul business class, we're always going to want to use one of those vouchers, because otherwise it just costs a crazy amount of points and it doesn't feel like as good value to be doing that. And it feels especially low value to be using it without a voucher when you compare it to the next item that I want to talk about. So the next one is using Avios to book flights on BA's One World partner airlines. Now obviously it varies from airline to airline, But for the majority, the amount of points they charge are so much less compared to BA, and often the taxes and charges that they charge on these things as well are also a lot less. Just give you a couple of examples to illustrate this. If you were flying from London to Doha and you decided to do that with British Airways, a one-way business class ticket for one person would be 90,000 Avios. If instead you flew with Qatar, and keep in mind you could then be in a Q suite, which is considered by many to be the best business class product out there, you're only paying 43,000 Avios for that same ticket. That's less than half what BA are charging, so even if you were using a companion voucher in this example, you're still spending less points if you went with Qatar. The savings can get even better if your flight is originating from outside the UK. The UK does impose quite high taxes and charges on flights, so anytime you can start your trip outside of there, you can save a lot on the taxes and charges. For example, if you're in the States and you fly with American Airlines, those redemptions can be really good value. And going back to the Doha example that we used before, if instead of flying from the UK you were flying from Helsinki or Copenhagen, then you've got the option of flying with Finnair. Flying with Finnair in business class is only 20,000 Avios, plus about 40 quid in the taxes and charges, significantly less than both Qatar Airways and BA. Another great value way of using your points is on one-way tickets. If you book a one-way cash ticket with BA and a lot of other legacy airlines as well, they charge huge amounts, and often the one-way ticket is actually a lot more than booking a return. In those situations where you only need the one-way ticket, booking with points can be a huge saving, as the amount of points required to book the one-way ticket are just half the amount of the return journey. And the next one I wanted to talk about is using your points for short-haul flights in Europe, particularly when you fly to destinations where the cash price is high. And this is where that calculation we talked about before can come really useful. Look at what the cash price is going to be, divide that by the number of points required to get that saving, to give you an idea of what value you're getting per point. I would always aim for an absolute minimum of 1p per point. But ideally you're looking for something that will give you value well beyond that. If you're not getting at least 1p per point, you're probably actually better off just using a cashback card. Similarly, when I'm always using the BAE store to earn Avios, if I wasn't going to be getting a good amount of value for those points, I would be better off just using a cashback site. So let's say you found a destination where the cash fare is quite expensive, but you've seen that there's Avios availability to fly there. One thing to really look out for is that when you're making this booking, BA will give you a few different options of the cash amount that you can put towards this. Now, it used to be the lowest amount of cash you would put towards it would be £30 for economy and £50 for business, and that's for a round trip. However, they've now introduced a new option where you can pay as little as £1. And you might think that sounds fantastic, and many people do. The problem with that is, if you look at the additional amount of Avios you need to use to pay the £1, the value you're getting for those points less than 1 penny per point. So often the sweet spot for value is still paying what you used to have to pay, which is that either £50 or £30. So just make sure before you do consider paying less that you do that calculation, that trade-off, to make sure that you're not being ripped off for your points. And that leads me on nicely to the 3 ways of redeeming Avios that you should avoid. The first of these is when you're booking a cash flight and BA offers you the opportunity to reduce that cost by using some Avios. It'll tell you something like, oh, save £200 on this by using Avios. But when you look at the amount of Avios required to give you that deduction, you're getting terrible value for your points. Again, talking about the calculation before, take the amount that you're going to save in cash, divide that by the number of points that they're asking you to get, and that's giving you the cash value of that. And in most cases, when they're using Avios to deduct from the cash price, you're getting a terrible deal. So the next way is to exchange your Avios for Nectar points. Now, when this was first launched, it was quite a poor deal to transfer your Avios to Nectar, unless you had no chance of using those Avios for a flight, and you just want, or you had tons of Avios and you just wanted to use it on your supermarket shop. It just wasn't a great rate that you were getting for your points. I think when it first launched, you were getting something like 0.66p per point, which, again, not worth it to me. But they've actually devalued it recently, so it's even worse value now. Absolutely not worth it unless you somehow have way more points than you can ever spend on flights. And then the final one that I wanted to group into this is honestly just any non-flight redemption. BA lets you trade your Avios for all sorts of things: hotels, experiences, wine, all sorts of ways you can use your points. and pretty much all of them are terrible value. Again, if you really want, you can do the calculation. You can look at how much that hotel was going to cost in cash. You can see how many points it's going to use up to book it. But generally speaking, it's not even worth doing the calculation. In basically every case on this, it's poor value. So there we have it, the 5 best ways you can use your Avios and the 3 worst. Hopefully you learned something from these tips. If you can think of any other great ways to use points that I've not mentioned here, please do leave them in the comments below. And if you're sat here thinking, but I don't really have enough points to do any of the things you suggested, then watch this video next. Thanks so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.